world had spring holidays with themes of rebirth and resurrection. In fact, I found one reference to an ancient god, and I think it was not the only story of this kind, who was literally cut down on a day they called Black Friday and thought to have then been resurrected on Sunday. This long preceded Christianity, you understand. Easter itself most likely takes its name from the great mother goddess of Estra. One of the most powerful miracles of this season is the renewal and the rebirth of the earth out of winter's seeming death. It's easy to see why the ancient peoples believed that spring truly was a miracle, after everything seemed to have died and then come to life again. And to us who are so knowledgeable about the seasons, so crammed full of scientific knowledge and understanding that seeks to take away our wonder in the face of the world, we know all about the cycles of nature and the dormancy of plants during the cold seasons. To us in our modern world, as I said to the children, it's still a miracle. The Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh puts it this way: people usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle, but I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. He's reminding us of the power of being mindful of our surroundings, being truly present to the world around us. Just as Willa Cather reminds us to allow our perceptions to be made finer, so that our eyes can see and our ears can hear what is around us always, but so often unnoticed. Now, we Unitarian Universalists tend to be really comfortable with the nature miracle stuff. We like that stuff. The celebration of spring resonates with our own experiences of waking up to new life and new energy. And we know that spring comes. We know because year after year we have lived through the winter. We have despaired of spring's ever coming, and yet we've known in that deep part of us that knows without even thinking that it will come. We know that as surely as we know anything. We may get impatient, but we don't doubt the coming miracle of green leaf and bright blossom and soft breezes. We've seen the triumph of life over death in nature so many times, and we trust it. When we're in the middle of winter, we know how the story turns out. And we celebrate spring as a metaphor for miracles and new life. And most of us, no matter how ambivalent we may be about various religious ideas, can enter into that miracle of spring with our whole hearts. That is a miracle we can believe in. But the other religious holidays that come at this time of year, the stories of both Passover and Easter, give us these big, literal miracles to struggle with. The parting of the Red Sea, no small feat. The raising of a body from the dead, remarkable. Now, most Unitarian Universalists don't believe in such literal miracles. We live in a scientific world. We know what does and doesn't happen. We accept these stories as stories that the ancient people told to explain how they felt about their experience, but we don't take seriously events that are so far outside of the laws of nature that govern our lives. And so it's not always easy to know what to do with these holidays, how to celebrate them, or whether to celebrate them at all. And I've had friends say to me, "Why on earth do you celebrate Easter?" I once had an experience early in my ministry at Bucksmont when I went to a Good Friday service. And a woman next to me who was from the church where the service was being held looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, keeping my temper, "I'm worshiping." And she said, "But you're a Unitarian." And I wish I had had the presence of mind to come back with some profound statement about the deep symbolic and metaphorical meanings of walking through the experience of death and despair to come to new life. But all I did was look at her in silence and then turn away. Now, we can take the stories literally and say we don't believe them and be done with it. But if we do that, then we miss all this richness. We miss the power of what the stories are about, the spiritual truths that can inspire and sustain us. The stories evolved the way they did because they met deep spiritual needs for many, many people, including me and perhaps many of you. Although I am not Jewish and have no Jewish heritage, I find incredible power and meaning in the story of Passover. And although I was not raised as a Christian, was in fact raised to be intensely suspicious of all things Christian, the Easter story, which of course includes the Good Friday story, has given me an astonishing window into new ways of thinking about life and renewal. So let's take a look at those stories on this Easter morning that falls in the middle of Passover. Take that Passover story. Take the story of Moses. Remember, in a nutshell, Moses was sent by God to go back into Egypt and free his people from Pharaoh, right? He didn't want to go. Lord, send somebody else, he said. He said he wasn't good at speaking. Some authorities suggest that perhaps he was a stutterer. He didn't feel confident. He didn't feel competent to go back into Egypt and free his people. He wanted God to please find somebody else. But finally, he agreed that he would go in there and give it his best shot. I can relate to Moses. I can hear in that little piece of the story part of my own experience of being asked to do things that I think are beyond my capabilities, but that I know are important, and finally giving it my best shot. I have not always been as successful as Moses, however. Look at the Israelites, enslaved, oppressed, with all the odds against them. But in the face of seeming hopelessness, they never gave up hope, and they found their way to freedom. The courage and determination of a people leads to the possibility that freedom can be born out of bondage. That is a miracle I can believe in. During our Seder at Unitarian Universalist House this year, the nursing home where I work, the rabbi shared some words that really made me stop and think. For some reason, it helped part of the ritual hit me in a new way. It was as we were dipping the karpas, the bitter vegetable that represents the bitterness of slavery, and you dip it in salt water, which represents the tears of the Israelites. Usually it's parsley that's used for the karpas, and I knew that that also carries symbolism of new life, the greenery and freshness of it. But I want to share the words that she shared with us from a night of questions. Karpas represents spring and new growth, rebirth, and the beginning of new life. We taste in this fresh vegetable all the potential in nature and in ourselves. Tonight we celebrate our growth, the flowering of our spirit and our voices. We do not taste the vegetable alone. We dip it into salt water, recalling the tears our ancestors shed during their long years of slavery. We mix bitterness with sweetness, slavery with freedom, past with future. We live with the contrasts because we know that no moment exists without a multitude of combinations, sorrow and joy, pain and comfort, despair and hope. So the karpas, the dipping of the parsley in the salt water, reminds us that out of our old sorrows and pains can come new life and growth and freedom. And that is a miracle I can believe in. If we looked only at the literal elements of the story, if we waited for a Moses to come and part the Red Sea for us, we would probably wait a long time, and we would not lead anyone to freedom. But if we look in the story for the power of the human spirit and the spirit of love and justice to move in the world, then we wind up with Mohandas Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., finding the courage to lead their people to justice in the face of tremendous odds. And perhaps we also wind up with the courage to take our own small steps to end oppression in ourselves and for others, to foster freedom and peace and justice. And that is a miracle I can believe in. And then take the Easter story. And here I have to warn you, I don't think we can talk about Easter without talking about Good Friday. Because even in many Christian churches, the huge emphasis is on the resurrection, you can't resurrect what hasn't died. And so you can't experience the power of the symbolism of Easter without looking at the power of the symbolism of Good Friday. So in this story, we have this group of disciples who have just seen their leader